11, the king's son, the maid's son, who exchanged on a wall. Once was a king. In his home there was a maidservant who would serve the queen. Generally a cook would not be allowed into the presence of the king, but this was a maidservant of low status. The time came for the queen to give birth. The time came for the queen to give birth. The time came for the queen to give birth. The time came for the maidservant to give birth. At that time as well, the midwife went and switched the infants to see what would arise from this. And how the matter would turn out. She switched the infants, placing the king's son next to the maidservant, and the maidservant's son next to the queen. Then these sons began to grow up. The king's son, that is, the one who grew up with the king, because they thought he was the son of the king, was raised level by level until he became ever greater and was very successful. So growing up in his house was the maidservant's son, that is the king's true son, only he was raised by the maidservant. The two of them learned together in the same school. The king's true son, who was called the maidservant's son, was instinctively drawn to the matters of royalty, but he was raised in the home of his servants. On the other hand, the maidservant's son, who was called the king's son, was instinctively drawn to a different mannerism, not the manners of a king. But he was raised in the king's home, and he had to act in the manner of royalty. Because they were raising him in this manner. Being that women are right-minded, the midwife went and revealed to someone how the children were switched. And a friend has a friend, and the secret was revealed from one person to another, according to the way of the world, until everyone was gossiping about this. How the king's son was switched, but it was not permitted to speak about this, lest it be revealed to the king. Nach, nachma, meuman, because it certainly was not permitted for the king to know of this. For what could the king do about it? There was no way to fix it. It was impossible to believe with certainty. Perhaps it was false, and how would it be possible to go back and switch? Therefore, it was certainly forbidden for them to reveal this to the king. The people just gossiped to themselves about it. Then one day someone came along and revealed the secret in the years of the king's son, how they were saying that he was switched. But it is impossible for you to investigate this, because it is below your honor. It is impossible for you to investigate this at all, but I will let you know this. Perhaps there will be a conspiracy against the monarchy, and the conspiracy could be strengthened by for they will say that they are taking the king's son, king for himself. Like that is the one whom they are saying is the king's true son. Therefore you need to devise schemes against that son to get rid of him. These are all the words of the man who revealed the secret to the son of the maidservant, who was called the son of the king. The king's son went, that is the one who is called the king's son. The principle here is that wherever simply the king's son is mentioned, it refers to the one who was switched. That is the real son of the maidservant, except that he is called the king's son because he was raised by the king and began to inflict misfortune upon the father of the aforementioned son, who was really his own father, setting his eye on targeting him with misfortune constantly. He would constantly make trouble for him, hardship upon hardship, in order to uproot him along with his son. As long as the king was still alive, he lacked absolute power nonetheless. He would cause him misfortune. Subsequently, the king grew old and died. He took over the monarchy, i.e. the son of the maidservant, who was switched, and is now called the king's son. And now he made even greater misfortune for the father of the aforementioned son, hardship upon hardship. He would do it in a cunning way, in a way that the world would not understand, that it was he he who was causing him the misfortune, in a way that the world would not understand that it was he who was causing him the misfortune, because that would be unacceptable to the people. Rather, he would conceal the matter and would constantly cause him misfortune. The father of the aforementioned son understood that he was causing him trouble for the reason mentioned before. He spoke up and said to his son, that is the king's true son, but who because of the switch seemed to be his son, telling him this all the whole situation. He told him that he had great pity on him either way you look at it. If you are my son, I certainly have pity on you, and if you are the king's true son, you surely deserve even greater pity, because he wants to get rid of you completely. Perish the thought. Therefore you must get away from here. And the matter appeared very tragic in his eyes, but the king, i.e. the one who became king in place of his father, because he seemed to be the king's son, on account of the switch, was constantly targeting him with his woeful arrows, one after another. So the son decided to get away from there. His father gave him a lot of money and he left. It was very upsetting to the son, who was the king's true son, that he had been banished from his country for no reason. He looked at himself. Why? For what has this happened to me to be banished? If I am the king's son, surely this should not have happened to me. And if I am not the king's son, this should not have happened. If I am the king's son, surely this should not have happened to me. And if I am not the king's son, this should not have happened either. To be running away for nothing. For what have I done wrong? It upset him very much. As a result of this, he took to drinking and went to brothels, wanting to consume his life in this way, getting drunk and following his heart's desires. Since he was banished for no reason, the king took firm grasp of the monarchy. When he would hear that there were people who were gossiping and speaking about the switch, he would punish them and avenge them heavily. He ruled with force and strength. One day, the king went to hunt animals with his noblemen. They came to a nice place where there was a river, and they remained there to rest and to stroll. The king lay down, and the deed that he had done came into his mind, that he had banished the son for nothing. Because either way you look at it, if he was the king's son, wasn't it already enough that he had been switched? Why should he have been banished? And if he was not the king's son, he did not deserve to be banished either. What had he done wrong? As the king thought about this, he regretted this great mistake and injustice that he had done, but he could not figure out what to do about it. It was impossible to speak with anyone, to solicit advice in this matter. He became very upset with worry. He said to the nobles to go back, since worry had befallen him. There was no need to continue strolling. They returned to their homes. The king returned to his home. He obviously had many affairs and concerns. He became involved in his concerns, taking his mind off of the previous issue. The son who was banished, the king's true son, did what he did and squandered his money. One time he went out alone for a walk. He lay down, and it came into his mind what had happened to him. He thought, what has the Almighty done to me? If I am the king's son, I certainly don't deserve this. And if I am not the king's son, I don't deserve this either. To be running away and cast out. And he thought, on the other hand, if it is so that blessed God could do something like this, to switch the king's son, etc., then is it proper what I have done? And was it fitting for me to behave as I did? And was it fitting for me to behave as I did? And he began to feel great pain and regret over the evil deeds he had done. And he began to feel great pain and regret over the evil deeds he had done. Then he went back to his place and resumed his drunkenness. However, since he had already begun to feel regret, he was constantly disturbed by thoughts of regret and repentance. One time he laid himself down to sleep, and he dreamt how in a certain place there is a fair on a certain day, that he should go there and he should take the first paying job that he comes across, even if it is below his honor. He awoke, and this dream was deeply ingrained in his mind, for sometimes the subject matter passes away quickly from the mind. But the content of this dream entered deeply into his mind. Nonetheless, it seemed difficult for him to do this, and he turned to heavier drinking. Nonetheless, it seemed difficult for him to do this, and he turned to heavier drinking. He dreamt this same dream several times, and it disturbed him very much. Once they were saying to him in the dream, "If you want to have pity on yourself, do it." So he had to fulfill the dream. He went and gave the rest of the money he had left to the and he also left his fancy clothing at the inn. He took for himself a simple garment, and he journeyed to the fair. He arrived there, and he got up early and went to the fair. A certain merchant encountered him and said to him, "Would you like to be hired for a certain job?" "Yes," he answered him. He said to him, "I need someone to lead animals. Hire yourself out to me." Because of the dream he had, he didn't take the opportunity to second guess this. He spoke up and immediately said, "Okay." The merchant hired him right away and immediately began to make him work and order him around in the way of a master over his servants. He began to look at himself what he had done. For this type of servitude was certainly not fitting for him, as he was a delicate man, and now he had to guide animals, having to walk on foot next to the animals. However, it was impossible to go back. The merchant ordered him around in the way of a master. He asked the merchants, "How can I walk with the animals alone? There are other shepherds. There are other shepherds guiding my animals," he answered him. "You can walk with them." He gave him the responsibility of leading certain animals, and he led them outside of the city. There the other shepherds who led the animals gathered together, and together they went along. He led the animals, and the merchant was riding on his horse and proceeding with them. The merchant was riding cruelly, and was especially cruel to him, the king's true son. He was very, very afraid of the merchant, since he saw the great cruelty that he directed at him. He was afraid that he might strike him with a single blow of his staff, and he would die instantly. That is because of his great frailty, for he was a very delicate man, therefore, that is how it appeared to him. He was walking with the animals, and the merchant was with them. They came to a certain place. They took the sack which contained the bread for the shepherds, and the merchant gave them food, and he gave the king's true son too from this bread, and he ate. Afterwards they were walking by a very dense forest. That is, the trees were crowded very close together. Two animals from the animals of the son, who became a shepherd of the merchants, wandered off. The merchants yelled at him, and he went after them to capture them. They fled further, and he pursued them. Since the forest was thick and dense, they saw wide of each other immediately upon entering the forest, and he immediately became hidden from his friend's sight. He was chasing after the animals, and they were running away. He pursued them heavily until he came into the thickness of the forest. Either way, he figured, "I'm dead, because if I go back without the animals, the merchant will kill me." That was how it seemed to him, because of the fear he had of the merchant, that he would kill him if he returned without the animals, and if I stay here, the wild animals of the forest will kill me. Why would I return to the merchant? How could I come to him without the animals? For he was very afraid of him. He went and chased further after the animals, and they fled. Meanwhile, it became Nabawite. Something like this had never happened to him before, that he would have to sleep alone at night in such a dense forest. He heard the sound of the wild animals roaring according to their nature. He decided to climb a certain tree and sleep there. He heard the sound of the wild animals roaring, as is their way. In the morning he looked and saw his animals standing next to him. He descended from the tree and went to capture them, and they ran away. He continued after them further, and they fled further away. The animals found some grasses there. And they stopped to graze and eat. He went to capture them, and they fled. And so he would go after them, and he would flee. He went to capture them and they fled, and so he would go after them, and they would flee. He would go after them and they would flee, until he entered into a very thick part of the forest, where there were wild animals that are not afraid of meuman at all. Because they are far removed from civilization, it again became night. He heard the sound of the wild animals roaring, and he became very afraid. He saw, and behold, standing there was a very large tree. He climbed the tree. He climbed the tree. He climbed the tree. As he came up the tree, he saw a person lying there. He became frightened, even though it was comforting. Even though it was comforting to find a person there. They asked each other, "Who are you? A person. Who are you? A person. How did you get here? How did you get here?" He did not want to tell him what had happened to him, so he answered him, "Because of animals. I was a shepherd, and two animals wandered here, and that's how I got here." He asked the man whom he found in the tree, How did you come here?" "I came here because of a horse," he replied. "I was riding on a horse, and I stopped to rest, and the horse went and wandered into the forest. I chased after him to capture him, and he fled further until I arrived here. They joined together there to become a team. They spoke between themselves. They spoke between themselves. And that even when they would come to civilization, they spoke between themselves, that even when they would come to civilization, they would remain together as a team. Nanach, meuman. Nanach, nachman. Meuman. Nanach, nachman. Meuman. Nanach, nachman. They joined together there to become a team. They spoke between themselves that even when they would come to civilization, they would remain together as a team. The two of them slept the night. There they heard the sound of the great roaring of the wild animals. Towards morning, a very great sound of laughter, was heard over the face of the entire forest. The sound of laughter spread throughout the entire forest, for it was a very great laughter, to the extent that the tree shook, and Rava walked from the sound. He was very panicked and frightened from this. The second one said, "Am I this person whom he had found in the tree, who was laying there from before? I am not afraid of this anymore. I have already slept here for many nights, every night." As they approaches, this sound of laughter is heard, to the extent that all the trees rustle and shake. He was very panicked and said to his friend, "It seems that this is the place of demons, because no sound of laughter like this is heard in civilization. Who has heard the sound of laughter over the entire world?" It immediately became day. They looked and saw, and behold, the animals of this one were standing there, and the horse of that one was standing as well. They descended and began to pursue, this one after the animals, and that one after the oars. The animals were fleeing further along, and he pursued as before. The second one too chased after the horse, and the horse fled until they had grown distant and strayed from one another. Meanwhile, he found a sack with bread, and this is certainly very, very valuable. In the wilderness, he placed the sack on his shoulder and went after the animals. Nanach, nachma meuman. Nanach, nachman meuman. Nachman meuman. Nanach, nachman meuman. Nanach, nachman. Nachman meuman. Nach nachman. Nachman meuman. Nach nachman. Nanach, nachman. Nachman meuman. Nanach, nachman. Nachman meuman. Nach nachman. Nachman meuman. Nachman